Great. So, hi, Charlotte. Welcome to Insights with NetSupport Corporate. How are you and how's your week been?
Hi, Kat. I'm good, thank you. Last week was a long, soggy week in
Yes, we're
Leeds.
definitely soggy here too.
Yeah, we've just come off the back of a very autumnal
Mm,
weekend. Yeah, I'm feeling good this morning, thank you.
good. Yeah, it's definitely a lot warmer here today. I don't know about in Leeds, but yesterday was really cold in comparison. So
Yeah.
it's nice. So would you mind just starting by introducing yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Charlotte Speak. I am the founder of Power of the Parent, which is a company that I set up. It'll be cracking on for 6 years in March next
Oh
year. So not
wow.
quite
It's a
not
long
quite there,
time.
but yeah. Um, and I partner with organisations to support parents in the workplace is the short handle. I do that through a few different ways. Some of that comes through working directly with parents. Sometimes it is about supporting line managers.
Yeah.
It can be working with groups like parental and carer support networks. It might be coming in and working with a specific function. It's quite a rich tapestry of different pieces of work. When I first
Mm.
set up, it was all about supporting returners,
Yeah.
and I was almost like my own client in a way, because I was coming off the back of my second parental leave, and
Mm.
um, I just fundamentally believe that there are so many conversations that we're not having about how we support parents in the workplace. And
Mm.
like I say, at the time when I first set up, very much to do with returners, but actually it's grown arms and legs, mainly because lots of things have come into sharp focus off the back of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's meant that workplaces are looking very different and they're needing to support people in different ways. So yeah, I don't really have any sort of typical day or typical week anymore.
Mm.
And it's kind of peppered with a bit of workshop delivery. I do one-to-one coaching. I've recently expanded my team. So
Mm.
I've got somebody that works alongside me now, which is fantastic.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's a real lovely blend ultimately to help organizations craft amazing parental support strategies.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fantastic. So I was going to ask you if your passion for supporting parents in the workplace, where kind of where that comes from, but I guess, like you say, it's because you were your own quiet client, basically.
I did. I had so I have two daughters,
Mm,
um I, and I almost made it back after the second one.
yeah.
But through since becoming a parent, a lot of what I had to face, um, some of it was borderline discrimination, some of it
Mm,
was absolute had proof
right out there. Mm,
discrimination, and all that was in between, and things that were said and vocalized to me that were just completely inappropriate to
yeah.
think, let alone say out loud.
Mm,
And also, it wasn't all negative. I also felt stronger than ever. I felt
yeah.
like I had a whole different reason to need to pay my bills, and everybody's reason is different. You don't have to have children to
Yeah.
suddenly think, I want to be valued or I want to do a really brilliant job. It just so happened that that was something that did shake me a little bit and think
Mm,
there's got to be more to life than this.
yeah.
And I was an extreme people pleaser, and
Mm,
super delighter before I had my girls. And I would say there's still elements of that of me in
yeah.
there, but I have massively reduced that down. So I think,
Mm,
um, being curious, wanting to change workplaces, wanting when they're 6 and 9, I would
mm,
love, and I don't know whether I probably won't have had a complete reform, but I would love it if when they got to the age of being in workplaces, whatever job they end up doing,
mm.
that they don't face some of those barriers that I
Yeah.
face.
Yeah. That would be incredible, wouldn't it?
It really would.
Yeah, no, that's a really great aim. So obviously you said you don't want them to face some of those barriers. What are some of the key barriers that we're seeing for parents in the workplace then?
Um, well, it would be remiss of me not to mention the great childcare debate,
Mm, of
because
course.
that it's a massive one and it's very visible, and it it's basic infrastructure to
Mm,
many countries. It isn't really in the UK. It's
No.
drastically underfunded.
Yeah.
We don't put the same level of importance on care and responsibilities as we do lots of other things that are the basic things that we need to be able to run a country. And I won't
Mm.
get political about it, but ultimately it is.
Yeah.
So I think, childcare is a big one, and sometimes organizations can think that's, above our pay grade. If we're saying it's
Mm.
infrastructure, that's something that's got to be dealt with elsewhere. But actually, I
Mm.
think there's an abundance of things that we can do as organizations, everything from offering, voucher scheme support to help people fund childcare, to all the way through to things like flexible working. It is not a parent only issue. I'll get that in straight away,
Yeah.
but it does massively help. So I think, yeah, childcare is definitely up there.
Mm.
I think one of the other things is assumptions around ambition. So there are lots of
Right.
societal narratives that hold parents back, and in particular mums.
Mm.
But I'll come on to that. But I think, how do we define success?
Yeah.
How do we define ambition? Are all real big burning platforms that I don't think we're pushing quickly enough against. So
Mm.
there are still very traditional definitions and views of what
Yeah.
success means, and there's no space for nuance. There's no space for, let's be curious and ask people actually what is
What does that
important to
mean to you?
them.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's a really big issue. I think the fact that we do predominantly still talk about mums, and we do still predominantly talk about maternity.
Mm.
Now I
Yeah.
am a mum, and I had 2 maternity leaves. However,
Mm.
there are so many different ways to become a parent, and there are
Yeah.
so many experiences of parenthood that this royal there are lots of organizations and individuals, like some
Mm.
people in similar lines of work to me, where we will focus on maternity leave. When I first set up, I was all about supporting returners from maternity leave. I
Yeah,
learned
but I
very
mean that makes
quickly.
sense because obviously you're just going from your own experience, but
Yeah,
then obviously then when you expand it, you can realize actually there's so many different experiences, aren't there? So
there are, and
yeah.
you can't just fix it for one group of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's an abundance of things that we can go after that we're just sort of
Mm.
kind of bumbling along a little bit with, really.
Yeah.
And there are some brilliant things out there. I think that's one of the other barriers. In a weird way, we
Mm.
come at this often from a very negative place of deficit, place of what we're not doing. Actually, if we went a little bit deeper and looked at what are all the brilliant things that are happening out there,
Yeah.
there's so much we could be building on. So
Mm.
it's not a barrier in the same way that childcare being broken is,
Mm.
but it's not a million miles off. So
Yeah.
um, I think the other thing is that we live in a culture where cancellation is very easy, and
Mm.
I think that sometimes holds line managers, it sometimes holds individuals, leaders back from saying something in case they get it really wrong.
Yeah.
And often then when there's silence, that can be just as damaging. So I
Yeah.
think there is a real barrier there to equipping or creating a culture where actually we do want to encourage people giving things a go. And if you
Mm.
get it wrong, then you need to be held to account, but we
Yeah.
also need to have a bit of space for we want to help people learn as well. So I
Mm.
think that's a bit of a barrier too.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's difficult when people are afraid of getting it wrong. I guess that's like you say, it's finding the space to give people the chance to learn and ask questions and things rather than just silence.
Yeah, exactly.
Just yeah, just as damaging for sure. So you said that there are companies that are doing really great things, and then obviously there are places to improve. So how can companies start to break down some of these barriers?
um I think in my experience over the last almost 6 years, a lot of this conversation becomes an HR problem to fix.
Mm.
And my background was in HR. I have a lot of friends who are still in that HR space,
Yeah.
and a lot of professionals that I admire about how they're working. Um, but it isn't their sole responsibility to
Yeah.
sort a lot of this out. So I think when it is seen as for a specific function to fix. I think that is a big problem. But I think we have got things that and formats that we know are tried and tested and work. So having groups like parent and carer support networks, again, it's not for them to sort, but to have them with a voice at the table can be really, really helpful. I think engaging line managers and leadership teams and bringing in sponsorship as early as you possibly can, so that this isn't somebody's sideline. You give people budget to do things. If you end up either needing to bring in somebody like me, or if you need to make some sort of investment, be that time or money, then show that. Let people know that that's something that you advocate for, because that sends a really strong, powerful message. I think the can sometimes people be operating kind of at one end of the scale as well. So we will often champion policies, and this, what I'm about to say, sometimes makes organizations nervous, but policies aren't the be all and end all. Like a rubbish policy is sorry, wrong way around. A great policy is not going to save you from rubbish leadership. And you know, really pants line management. So if you, and we know that this has happened, I'm not going to kind of name and shame, but there are organizations that have, you know, here's our amazing policy, it's got a gold stamp and we've won this award for it, and then the following week they've hit the headlines, or maybe not quite the following week, but in the not too distant future they will then hit the headlines because they've been taken to a tribunal, or they've, you know, somebody said, I've had this case for discrimination. Or you don't even need to get to that stage. It can just feel really rubbish to work somewhere, and people saying, actually, that isn't our culture, that isn't what's happening. So I think that we've got to do better at not relying on policy. At the other side of that, though, and I generally do try and see all sides of the conversation. We also don't want to spend loads of time and loads of money putting in an abundance of workshops or making coaching available to people, because you are just throwing jelly at a wall and seeing what sticks. So it's got to be a joint conversation that says, right, what is our strategy? What's our company strategy? Let's start right from the top and think, what are we trying to achieve as a business, as an organization? And what are the feeds into that? And one strand should be how you are supporting parents and carers. And there will be a million strands, but that does need to be one of them. And within that, it should be about, how do we tie that to our overall talent strategy? How does it link to our reward and recognition strategies? There's so much that we can go after. And I think, therefore, giving yourself some grace and compassion that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. So a lot of people that I have either worked with or have had conversations with, maybe we've not got to the stage of working together, but there will be this undertone of, we've got to show a return really quickly, or we've got to sort this now or yesterday. And don't get me wrong, we want some of that speed, but we don't want, like, really, we want to drive decisions from the right place, not just because it's performative, not just because it's a quick fix, or yes, it ticks that box. If you really want to make those changes and embed them, there's got to be an element of longevity to some of the things that you're doing. You know, it isn't a nice to do. It isn't just about tolerating some of these conversations. There's a lot to go after. So I think there's some of the, you know, considerations to make in a very basic sense. I have a list of about, you know, 276 things.
I'm sure.
But they would be some of the things that they're probably the most common things. This whole, how do you blend policy with lived experience, and how do you drive action and not just from an ivory tower be setting a strategy, basically. Would be some
how
of
are
the
you going to measure that there's been progress as well? Like, what goals are you setting, and how do you make sure you're kind of accounting for those, I guess? Because, like, it's kind of links back to what you said before. It's all well and good having a good policy, but if you don't actually use it or follow through with it, it's pointless. So and having conversations makes sense, because I'm sure, like, I mean, every individual is different, and the support that they would want and need is different as well. So those must be some really important conversations to have with individuals. So when we were talking about recording this, you said there are a lot of misconceptions about parental support strategies, and you touched on that a bit just now when you were saying about not just chucking money at, workshops and coaching and seeing what sticks. Can you share a bit more about those misconceptions and why you think they happen?
I think the first big one is that you don't need a strategy.
Mm,
It's that you can wing it, you can figure it
yeah.
out, and it falls into this nice to do category.
Mm,
Because I think, again, if I go back to the very beginning of this conversation where we were talking about some of the views of society and those narratives that can be wildly unhelpful but have been held for centuries
oh yeah.
about caring,
Mm,
and actually that, I think, making sure that you therefore really very purposefully think, what does strategy mean to us as an organization?
mm,
Because it's a really big word, isn't it? And it's still a buzzword. And it's still something that, I think, for a lot of people, we reserve for this specialist group who are the brightest thinkers in an organization, or the most intelligent, or
mm,
um, that it's all about this helicopter overview.
yeah.
Actually, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's an element of that in there, but some of the best strategies and some of the best strategic conversations I've been party to have been a real beautiful blend of, so what, and what's the action here, and what actually do we
Mm,
want to do, and this is what we want to work towards, but what does that look like in reality for
yeah.
our people? Because otherwise it's stuff written down on a piece of paper that doesn't ever get turned into
Mm,
anything. I think the other thing to consider is regular quality feedback. So without that, you have got spots that you are not going to see. And I will often talk to organizations and they'll say, well, we've done some listening groups and
mm,
we've got all this really great stuff. I'm like, that is fantastic. Keep that up. Let's keep doing that. However,
mm,
where are the voices of the people who do not want to go and sit in a listening group? Where are your other
yeah.
data points? Where are those other feeds in? Because we need to be as equitable as possible with these conversations, and actually saying, well, yeah, we've got some feedback because we've sat 20 people in a room. You're not telling me that you had equal share of voice,
Mm,
and that's fine. You don't necessarily need it. You don't always need that. However, um, for those people that feel wildly uncomfortable,
mm,
have you given people an option of a one-to-one piece of
yeah.
feedback? Who has done those feedback sessions? Have you done some online stuff? Have you got some qualitative versus quantitative data?
Mm,
Because actually what we're trying to do is really piece together, how do we tell the story,
yeah.
and not just look at quotas and metrics and what's the ROI. We do need that. I get
Mm,
that. Um, but there's so much more behind that. All those stats that we constantly share that hit the headlines, there are real people sat behind it.
mm,
So we've got to make sure that we are connecting those stories up.
yeah.
I think, and then I know I kind of alluded to it before, but I think the absolute non-negotiable now, it's not in the future, it is now, it's happening right now. We have to make sure that we are, whatever we put in, it needs to be understanding of different versions of parenthood and different
Mm,
experiences of parenthood. So the route to becoming a parent, definitely there are multiple routes to becoming a parent. So let's figure out, have you only got a maternity leave policy,
mm.
or have you um, oh, can
Oh,
you hear
you
me?
dropped out for a second there. You're back now.
I'll start
So
again.
I heard from, have you only got a maternity leave policy? And then it just went,
Okay,
bloop.
I'll go from there. I don't know what
Yeah,
just
no
happened.
problem. Yeah, it was weird.
So if, for example, you have only got a maternity leave policy,
Mm,
then where is everybody else? How do you know if what your policy is around the adoption process, or
yeah.
surrogacy leave, or equal parental leave?
Mm,
um, and ignoring that there are multiple routes to parenthood is a massive problem.
yeah.
um, and only talking about maternity or paternity is, again, where what if you're in a same-sex couple?
Mm.
If I'm a woman and I'm in a same-sex couple, I'm not taking paternity leave, because
No,
that
exactly.
paternity is for a man.
Hmm.
So that's, you're excluding a lot of people and making people feel like, well, they've got to ask for something that isn't there. And then it drives this
Mm.
narrative of special treatment and just a whole heap of rubbish that isn't true.
Yeah, that's very true.
And
I know I had a friend that had to ask a lot about kind of adoptive leave, and like, because there's like nothing in the policy, like what do I get? What can I do at her organization? And it was just so many uncomfortable conversations and waiting and stress, and it just seemed, yeah, and the commentary was less than favorable as well. So yeah, just it's really awful for her, because it's an, like you say, it's another way of being a parent. It all is, and it's all got to be all inclusive.
yeah, absolutely. We've got things like, the rate of people needing to access fertility treatment as well is
Yeah,
on
I
the
was going to
increase.
ask about that as well. Yeah.
So that's another thing. There's a lot to be said. It sends a very strong message when a company does have a policy in place, because it
Mm,
does show that you recognize different routes to parenthood, and it does show that, we it would be great if we could then, sharpen up some of those policies and actually meet people in their lived experience.
mm,
um, but as a start point, we have something that we can then work with, and we
yeah.
can go, like, all that quality feedback we talked about, then let's go out to the organization and say, look, this is what we're thinking as a policy. For
Mm,
those of you that have actually experienced this route to parenthood, how does this actually square up with your
yeah.
experiences?
Yeah. So get the feedback on those policies as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then once people have become parents,
Mm,
it's then the different parenthood experiences. So, what if you are a parent but also a carer? What
mm,
does that mean for you in the workplace?
yeah.
What if you are a solo or single or co parent? What does
Mm,
that mean in the workplace? If you have none of those, but you've got, we've all got multiple intersectionalities that will influence how we
mm,
parent and work and how we combine them together. But again, if we're constantly only looking at this very narrow, um, kind of 2.4 children, this is
mm.
how it's done, that's just it. Yeah,
And that
it's
does seem to
wild,
be the
really.
basis for a lot of things, like it is kind of in society as an expectation of parenthood and what that means as well.
But it's
Mad.
such, the conversations are just incredible when you have
Mm.
them with people, when you
Yeah,
learn, what have other people been through. And I think it is important to say here, that boundaries are incredibly important, and
of
we
course.
shouldn't, like,
Yes.
nobody owes us their story, and we don't, this is not about, how does it work in your household, or like share your
Mm,
trauma kind of thing. That's not what,
mm.
we definitely don't want to go down that
No.
route. So we do absolutely need to be mindful of boundaries,
Mm,
but there are lots of people that do want to share their story, that do want to say, these are the things that would actually really help me in the
mm,
workplace as a parent who is also navigating. Well, you don't always have to be navigating something else, but if
mm,
you are just, there is no, I have this conversation with my mum quite a lot, because she will often say to me, I don't think I could have been a parent of like younger children. Like, she
mm.
finds it difficult enough, and I'm in my late 30s.
Yeah.
But being the amount of noise that we have with social
Mm,
media, with people writing, here's my expertise book, here's this article, follow these three things and you'll have the most,
mm,
placid children in the world, all of that kind of stuff. It's there, and it's driving a lot of comparison, it's driving a
mm.
lot of parental anxiety and
Yeah,
burnout.
definitely.
We don't need that.
No.
um so I think, yeah, absolutely, just being mindful of boundaries. I think I've said
Mm.
that word enough now.
Yeah, no,
But
it's very important though, absolutely. And do you think one of the ways to help with that as well is, because you said about like different ways of listening to stories, would it be useful to give opportunities for staff to give feedback that's anonymous as well, so they feel like they can share without it being quite so personal, but they still get the opportunity to talk about things that they think would support?
yeah, absolutely. I think I know, lots of people have different opinions on anonymized
Mm,
feedback. Um, my personal opinion, I won't speak on anybody else's behalf, but my personal opinion is that it can hold a lot of value. And sure, if it's something very specific, it can be helpful to know where that's come from. But equally, I think we have to give people that headspace to think, I want to share something, but this feels really uncomfortable to put my name to it. Not everybody's some sort of online troll. They're not going to do it because they want to make people feel bad. But if you wanted to share something that felt very vulnerable, that felt, that we can't, tar everybody with the same anonymized brush. So I think if you can definitely make sure that there's an opportunity for that, yes, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and it was having that amongst the other ones as well, isn't it? So there's still the opportunity for it to be person. So what kind of support strategies should we be seeing? I mean, I'm sure there's loads, but just like a few examples of not the like standard, like, right, we're just going to give you coaching and a workshop or whatever. What are some of the key strategies we should be seeing?
I think a lot of this starts with how we recruit, how we retain, and how we develop people. So rather than thinking, what one strand might be, for example, supporting returners, and in which case there are some fairly tried and tested, obvious ways that you could do that. I think whatever strategy you're looking at, to keep it multi-format. So I'm a huge supporter, and I am very grateful for some fantastic clients that I work with who embrace this. So we don't just run a workshop every quarter or every other month or something. We will also build out things like support hubs that have got evergreen content on there that people can go and download a little video, or they can go and have a read on an info sheet, and they can do some self coaching, and they can have some conversation prompts on there for how they might want to go and talk to their line manager. I think the thing with it is that you want that strategy to be developed in line with people's actual needs. So keep that format as flexible as you possibly can, because I think only having one form of or one format or two is very limiting, and you are straight away causing yourself issues around inclusivity in every sense of the word. I think then the second thing is make sure that you're building, like I've just said, build it up with people's insights, with people's feedback. It doesn't have to be a hierarchy thing when you are developing that strategy. I would be getting a cross section of your organization, regardless of what size your organization is, for those insights, because somebody's experience as a parent will be wildly different. They are not a homogenous group of people. So the more you can feed in the different stories, the better. And I think a lot of what I've experienced over the last few years in particular, a real big trend in theme coming out from my clients is this desire for more connection, and that therefore, just having one-to-one coaching, for example, will go a long way, but it won't go all the way. And creating those communities within your organization is where the power is at. So the more you can do some of that, I think the better. And I also think recognizing that, how do you bring those different intersectionalities together in your organization? So one of my clients recently, they have a parent and carer support network. They've got about 7 or 8 at least that I know of, but one of them is an LGBT plus network, and they did a co-facilitation of an event where people were talking about their experience of being a parent in that LGBT plus community, and that again, it's really lovely, because you're not what you're doing is giving people a platform. You're passing that mic, and that is really what we want to be doing. But everybody that went to that event, the feedback was fantastic. I learned this, or it was lovely to hear a bit more about that, or I had no idea that was your day-to-day reality, or that's horrific that a family member said that to you. I'm going to make sure that if this ever happens in my friendship group or my family, that is something I don't say. And that all came from a 45-minute lunch and learn. Not, I hate the phrase lunch and learn, but that kind of, that kind of vibe, that people needed to invest their time, but it was pretty much maintained internally. And that's, some low-hanging fruit, really, isn't it? So
definitely.
I think, I don't know if I've answered your question really, but basically making sure that that there is a blend there in terms of voice, that there is a blend in terms of where you're getting feedback from. And if I was to come in and say to you, so what's your parental support strategy? If your response is, well, we offer coaching or we run these workshops, we need more. We need more. So if you're listening to this thinking, where else do I go? I would go back to the very basics. And I use a pyramid with a lot of my clients. And at the very bottom of the pyramid, you have things like policy, reinduction plans, talent strategy. How do you, what does your performance life cycle look like? So for example, I was working with somebody last week who had done pretty much all year in the workplace. They were finishing for their version of parental leave with a week before their appraisal window opened. And that person then didn't get an appraisal, and they have performance related pay. So that person has now not had a pay rise that they were deserving of because they were a week out. Now, first of all, it wasn't written in a policy anywhere. So it didn't say specifically, you've got to physically be in the business to have it. There was also nowhere that said that line manager couldn't have still done their appraisal and then submitted the week after when that person had gone. So we're sending a message there,
or anything.
Exactly. We're sending a message there. That organization is sending a message there that says, you can have worked all year and we're still not going to reward you for it. And that, I mean, we're talking about parents support rather than performance management cycles, but I've got a whole heap of opinion on that anyway. But that aside, that is what the difference is between having a policy and lived experience. So in an ideal world, what we would, not even in an ideal world, in a common sense world, you would have still done that person's appraisal and you would have submitted their appraisal grade the following week, and they would have had the pay rise that they deserve. As it is, they are battling for it now. So that is, they feel very strongly that they've missed out. And they don't want to have to say, I feel, discriminated against, but essentially that is what has happened. So you want to be able to avoid getting into hot water where it's really, really not required. So I think, listen to what is actually going on in your organization, and don't be scared of the mistakes and the failures. They will have happened. That is okay. I mean, one of my favorite ever podcasts is How to Fail, because I think there is so much power in recognizing, actually, that went really wrong, but what can we learn from it? And it isn't just about saying, let's just fail, it doesn't matter. It does matter, but it's what you do with it afterwards, isn't it?
And at least it's taking action then as well, rather than just sort of stagnating because you're afraid of failing. So Charlotte, it's all been amazing advice. So my last question really is just, where can our listeners best get in touch with you to learn more?
So I have a website, and it's power-of-the-parent.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can come and find me on there just as Charlotte Speak, or I do have a Power of the Parent page if you want to go and have a look at that as a business. And I sometimes hang out on Instagram, but at the minute it's like too many tabs open for life. So website and LinkedIn is probably the best place right now.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you, Charlotte. It's been brilliant to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.